yourself again. But it's the only way you're ever gonna learn. You look back and it's all in the past. I'm dwelling on that thought.
Good morning, welcome to Steve Wraith's podcast, and it's good morning to Robin Perrie from The Sun, who is live from the Ukraine. Robin, how are you?
I'm good, thanks. How are you?
Yeah, the tables are turned here, mate, because normally it is you interviewing me about something or quizzing me for something. But I was sitting having my breakfast the other morning, and lo and behold, you came up on Good Morning Britain, talking about your situation that you find yourself in, which is in, I believe it's Lviv, is it, in Ukraine?
That's correct, yes. That's why I currently am, yeah.
Yeah, amazing story. So how long have you been out there?
It's coming up 2 weeks now.
2 weeks. And what was, what was your first thoughts about going out to the Ukraine? I mean, obviously you're a journalist, you're somebody who, covers the northeast beat, if you like. What was your first thoughts about going out there?
Yeah, clearly, obviously, you've got an apprehension. It's kind of a unique experience for any journalist, however experienced you are, to go to somewhere that's an active war zone. It thankfully doesn't come along very often, but you've kind of just got to pack your bag and travel when the editor asks you to.
Yeah, I mean, what was your first impressions when you arrived?
Well, it's so Lviv is on the west of Ukraine, so it is a long way from the front line. But the moment you arrive, you're taken by how it clearly is a city in a country that's at war. As soon as you arrive in the city and you're driving in, there's checkpoints everywhere. There's huge sandbag walls, anti-tank defences, police, military, everywhere. You get asked for your ID wherever you go. And in the time I've been here, that's just ramped up more and more. It's lessened a little bit now, but there was a huge refugee situation here as people were flooding away from the east. The scenes at the station in Lviv, which is kind of the last main staging point before people get to Poland, it was just chaotic with some really heartbreaking scenes. So there's some really striking images. So as I say, it's a long way from the front line, but it clearly does feel like a country which is at war, which in 2022 in Europe is just bizarre.
Yeah, I mean, the images that we're seeing back home in England are very similar, to what we saw, the images that we're used to, the black and white images we're used to seeing of refugees being emigrated in 1939. And it's got all those hallmarks of World War II because, of course, it's on our doorstep. It's only 1,800 miles away.
Yeah, it's a really good point. That struck me a few times this week. It really does. Somebody's seen Striker as if they're from the kind of films we watch at the cinema. Like there was the other day we were down at the station again, and there must have been a couple of hundred soldiers who were being deployed, obviously to the east of the front line, and there was wives and girlfriends there kissing them goodbye. It's just incredible, striking, emotional images. And as I said just previously, there's this huge number of anti-tank weapons. These metal barriers they call hedgehogs that are placed all over the city. It's impossible not to walk around and feel like you are walking around in the early 1940s. It's a very strange feeling.
What's the morale like of the Ukrainian people?
It's unbelievable. The way I kind of think is, I mean, you're obviously a huge football fan, Stephen. You know better as good as anyone the kind of passion and conviction football fans have for their club. If you can times that by however many and extrapolate it across an entire nation, you still don't come anywhere close to how they feel their deep conviction and passion for their cause. I've spoken to so many people since I arrived, and I genuinely haven't heard one single word of negativity or pessimism about how they might do in this war. I guess it summed up best by a Ukrainian local businessman I spoke to just a couple of days ago, who said that Ukraine will win this war because Ukrainians have already won it in their minds, and it's just impossible to defeat a population which is so united. Is
there a shortage of things out there now, Robin? I mean, obviously you're 2 weeks into your stay out there, and obviously we watch the news here, but I mean, it's, you can watch BBC, ITV and Sky and get 3 different versions of what is going on out there. But what is the situation where you are at the moment as far as food and water and that's concerned?
The food and water is fine. The city, it's a strange thing in Lviv, really. It's very much a split city. As I explained, it feels like a city at war, in a war zone, but equally, in other ways, it is kind of operating as normal. But interestingly, yesterday, for the first time, we started seeing queues building up at petrol stations, and there's now a number of petrol stations which have run out of diesel. So it does feel we're in the 21st day of the war now, and as it sort of rolls on day by day, that those kind of shortages are starting now to creep across.
Yeah, I mean, it's been great to see Zelensky obviously coming out and being a leader. I mean, we talk in this country about how Churchill was a great leader. Zelensky certainly has, certainly captured the nation's hearts, I guess, in the way that he has put himself across, and he's made a hell of an impression in this country. I mean, the first leader from another country to address Parliament and on a Zoom call, and he got a standing ovation. But things like this, going to hospitals and seeing people. This is a story that you covered in your newspaper, The Sun.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. He's made an incredible impression, certainly here and around the world. And you never quite realise you're sort of in a period of history in the making when you're right in the heart of it. But I was just discussing with a Ukrainian guy yesterday that history will remember Zelensky as one of the great leaders. However, this war ultimately turns out and ends, and obviously no one knows how that will be. But whatever happens, he's made an incredible stand. And I think a crucial thing, sometimes the small decisions turn into big ramifications. And early on, there was some suggestions by other countries that were able to help him leave Kiev to ensure his safety, and he refused, and he said, "I'm staying put. This is our country, our capital. I'm going to stay." And I think that in one sense that could have been just a small decision, but it had huge symbolic importance for the Ukrainian people. If he was going to stand and fight effectively, then the Ukrainian people obviously flowed in behind him, and that I think that's helped feed into that incredible support amongst the population I mentioned earlier. They've got such an utter conviction. It's quite moving.
Yeah, it is, and I think the other strange image that I've had so far over the last few weeks is the likes of the Klitschkos. I mean, obviously, one of them is an elected mayor, but Klitschko, Usyk, we've seen the tennis players, sports stars, putting down the rackets, ungloving the boxing gloves and going out to defend their country, and it's something which I think is really captured people in Europe's imagination, that this is real, but these people are going to defend their country no matter what.
Yeah, absolutely. And Klitschko's, of course, the ultimate sporting warriors, aren't they? And and again, the utter conviction they've shown that they will put bluntly, they'll fight to the death to protect their city and their country. And I think that's genuine. You do believe them; they will do that, and that passes across into ordinary people as well. I did quite a lot of interviews with the footballers at the local Premier League club a couple of days ago, Rook Lviv, and it's Premier League. It's a really top level club. They're top flight. Where Shakhtar Donetsk play, and these guys, professional footballers, as of a couple of weeks ago, they're now sat there discussing taking up arms and going to the front line. And it's quite unbelievable that so many celebrities, sporting stars and ordinary people now their lives have been just changed forever, and they're considering going to fight in a war. It's just daily you struggle to kind of process that.
Obviously, you're part of the media pack that's out there covering the war for us back home. But what's the situation with TV and radio out there? Are the Ukrainians what kind of information are the Ukrainians getting on their TV networks and radio stations?
They're getting a lot and regularly. I mean, the Ukrainian government are incredibly proactive in putting out information. Each morning we wake up with I'm not sure if it's the first social media war, but I mean, it's certainly, the social media is so active these days that every morning we wake up and there are information about, at the moment, it's kind of sad, but a daily established ritual of shelling of residential blocks in the capital. And every morning information is coming out very, very quickly. And one thing I would say as well is that the Ukrainian people are incredibly grateful for the the world's media being here, in which there are lots, and they view that is a show of support of the one aspect of the global support that everyone is showing. The fact that the media are willing to come and report on them, and to be honest, I can't think of one person who's refused to talk to us. Everyone is so willing and to talk to us, and they want to get their message across to the world. So that's been an amazing reception as well.
Yeah, is there much damage around where you are, Rowan? Has it been shelled, or has there been much activity around where you are?
No, so the residential areas where we are have not been touched, and again, that's a weird sort of conflict in terms of two sides to the aspect in Lviv, is that the city centre feels relatively safe. It doesn't feel like there's going to be an imminent attack. But just on Sunday, we had the attack, which was well covered, at the military base near the Polish border, which is only 35 miles from the city. And that suddenly opened people's eyes that that even this city could be attacked. And one guy I spoke to in the city where the military base is, he summed it up perfectly by sort of saying this shows that, you know, everywhere in Ukraine is a target now. And I mean, clearly some Ukrainian people felt that risk over here. Others felt maybe a slight false sense of security that we were so far from the front line that we wouldn't be a target. But I think that was a bit of a step change in people's view, and ever since then, every single day for about, I think it's 5 or 6 nights now, we get air raid sirens in the middle of the night. Last night we had two, one at 2 o'clock, one at 5 o'clock, and then you get a loudspeaker goes out across the city centre telling people to go to the shelters. But again, the response to that is kind of shows it's a bit of a sort of split city, that perhaps, I don't know, maybe half the people do go to the shelters and stay there for 10 minutes, 2 hours. Half the people just carry on with their normal lives, knowing that the air raids come every day. And thankfully, there hasn't been an attack on the city yet. But as I say, the one on Sunday opened people's eyes that it just could come any moment.
Yeah, the story that was breaking over the last couple of days was obviously this Russian news reporter who had essentially gone on to the network. Now, it's interesting this morning, I'm not sure whether you'll have heard this or picked it up on the news feeds and news lines, but there is talk of this being a bit of disinformation, that potentially this woman is actually not what she appears to be, and that this is a bit of propaganda and a bit of misinformation that has been put out there. I mean, propaganda is a big thing in war, isn't it, Robin?
It is, and there's I think it's such an incredibly fast-moving situation, and it is incredibly hard to establish facts on the ground, and obviously, especially over in the east of the front line, so many areas are just inaccessible. And one interesting example, not necessarily propaganda, but kind of a related issue, is the reports, which we still haven't been able to clarify fully, about whether British fighters were or weren't killed in the attack at the military base on Sunday. Ever since that attack, there's been huge rumours circulating amongst the Foreign Legion community that there have been more victims than the 35 officially acknowledged, and that many foreigners, including some British people, were amongst them. British authorities, as of the moment, don't have any concrete information that they were. The Foreign Legion in Ukraine, the Ukrainian army, insists there weren't, but the rumours continue. So, it's very difficult in a time of war to absolutely establish every fact.
Yeah, of course. I mean, Liz Truss had famously came out a few weeks ago and, questioned on a political programme on the BBC. It said, if people want to go, they should go. But then she was reeled back in, and she was asked about that on Good Morning Britain this morning, actually, whether, she stood by her comments. And she said, look, there's been a clear directive now that people should not go out there. But of course, individuals, people who've been trained to kill will make their own decisions.
They will, absolutely. And, and running alongside the UK government's position is Zelensky is pleaded for the entire world to come and fight. It's and people are doing that. When we were in the city Yavoriv, where the attack happened on Sunday morning, and we were speaking to a huge paramedics from a huge line of ambulances that were pulled up, ready to be called into the base to deal with the paramedics. A car pulled up with us with plates on from the Netherlands. Two guys in their 40s got out in combat gear, but kind of clearly wasn't official military combat gear. And so I went to speak to them and said, "Are you volunteers? Are you going to the front?" And they saw, with a bit of smile on their face, they said, "We can't comment," and wandered off. And they obviously were. And there's a lot of people who, for want of a better phrase, are independents. The Foreign Legion is an official unit of the Ukrainian army that was set up just a few weeks ago, and people who join that become Ukrainian soldiers for the time of the war. And it is an official military unit, but there are many, as I say, freelancers, independents, whatever you want to call them, coming across as well, and just heading east.
The obviously biggest tragedy is the loss of any life, but the loss of a young life is worse. I mean, 103 children now being confirmed as dead, and I mean that is something again that you've had to cover. There was the Ukrainian girl as well who captured the world's heart, as you said in the headline there, who was singing "Let It Go." Thankfully, she's managed to make it to Poland. But yeah, this is the real tragedy of war, isn't it? That children are being killed.
Yeah, it really is, and I like you, I noted that that fresh figure which they it's released every day, the number of children that have died, and I mean every casualty is a tragedy, as you say, but it's difficult, isn't it, to try and process the how that must feel for the families and those connected when these people are and many of these shellings of these residential buildings take place in 5-6 o'clock in the morning. It's dark, they're asleep, and then a shell comes in. There's a terrible devastation of the building, and as the rescuers go in, they find another young body. It's just heartbreaking. Yeah,
it is. There is some positive stories though, and you managed to read one. I picked this up, and if anybody wants to read Robin's stories, click the link down below in the this description. All of the stories from the Ukraine are under one link there. Having a baby in a basement during a war is terrifying, but life must go on. I mean, that's a real uplifting, positive story.
It was an incredible story. So this was a lady we spoke to. We in the hotel in Lviv where we are, in the maternity hospital, and it's quite unbelievable, her story. So she lives in a town over right on the east, right in the front line, just a few miles from the Russian border. Day one of the war, it was all quiet. They thought they might get away with it. Day two, in her words, all hell broke loose. So they headed to the basement. She was heavily pregnant, days from giving birth. And with all the first baby, with all the worries that any woman has with her first child, first pregnancy, she had, the war to worry about as well. And she was terrified about whether she would be able to get to the hospital or not. Luckily, there was a bit of a cessation in hostilities for a day or so. So her husband was able to drive her to the hospital. She gave birth. There was complications with that. She had to have an emergency cesarean, as if she didn't have enough to worry about. The next day, the bombing, basically Russian troops were targeting the hospital. She was taken to a basement. The windows were shot out. It was freezing cold. She spent 48 hours in this tiny room with 10 other women. They then told her that they didn't have space for her because there was other expectant mums coming in. She had to return home. She had to go. She then fled to her mother's house where there was another basement they were hiding in. No electricity, no internet connection, freezing cold. Then they found that there was some evacuation buses that were leaving. So they managed to get a seat on that. But their ordeal still wasn't over. As they were leaving the city, Russian troops opened fire on a civilian convoy, and she found herself on the floor of this bus, hiding under the seat, clutching her by then 10-day-old child to her chest, desperately trying to shield it from the Russian bullets. They did make it out. They weren't injured at all, thankfully, and she's now in a hospital in Lviv, in the relative security, but utterly perplexed as to what her future holds. Their apartment has been bombed. It doesn't exist anymore, and they just don't know what they're going to do. Her husband is here with her. Her mother and grandmother are here. They're in a local hotel. She's been monitored in a hospital. And when you ask a lot of these people, what does the future hold? They kind of just shrug their shoulders. They genuinely do not know where they're going to live, where they're going to go, which again is, for us, looking at it from home in England, it's very hard to process the degree to which their lives have been turned upside down.
We hear a lot in the UK about talks between the two countries. We've seen them meeting, not once, not twice, but 3 times. Potentially this morning we hear some more positive news that that there may be a ceasefire. Maybe Zelensky might say that the Ukraine are not going to join NATO for now, and that may stop this. So we have this period of lockdown as well for as a 36 hours out there. I mean, is there any hope that this could come to an end quicker than we all thought?
Yeah, I think certainly if you wanted to sort of jump into analysing the politicians' words line by line, there definitely is an increased sense of optimism. This is the 4th round of talks. Each of the first 3 rounds just collapsed after one day. This is now in the 3rd day of it. And Zelensky has tweaked his comments about joining NATO. And obviously that aspect was one of the major motivations for Putin taking the action that he did. There's been positive comments as well from the other side, and they are from named quotes from negotiators who are at the table. So that there is a glimmer of hope. There is reason to be optimism, but let's wait and see. I mean, one bizarre aspect, well, it's bizarre to all of us, but it seems not to be bizarre to the Russian politicians in general, is that whilst they're taking part in increasingly sounding optimistic peace talks, they're also shelling residential buildings. So, you know, it's a kind of optimism tempered with realism, really. But you know, certainly they are the most realistic sounding talks since the conflict began. So fingers crossed on that front.
Obviously, in this country, there has been a few issues with bringing in refugees. But as you say, I mean, there's that many people who have had to be evacuated and moved out that it's it's not surprising, I guess, with what's gone on in this country with Brexit and then with COVID, that there has been rather stringent technique. Is where are the rest of the refugees going? Are they going to Germany and other European countries?
Well, interesting on that point is that certainly in the early days of the war, when I guess there was some sort of hope that they might be very quick, and obviously that hasn't happened. But certainly in the early days, the refugees' position was that they didn't want to come to the UK. They just wanted to get out of the war zone, get to the safety of Poland or Slovakia or Hungary, and then stay there. And then they wanted to go home. Obviously, they want to go back to their hometowns. Sadly, because it's gone on now for 3 weeks, some of those hometowns have just been obliterated, so that they can't go home. So I guess in every refugee situation, that there is a slow sort of trek westwards. But certainly the people we've been speaking to Poland is the main location, and Germany as well, and I guess that situation will evolve in the weeks and months depending on how the war develops. And one interesting aspect that the experts, like the Red Cross people, say is that these things do tend to come in waves. So the first wave is the people who I've needed to get out of the most dangerous areas, and perhaps because of their own situation or their own vulnerabilities, just need to get out of the country early. And that's the first. It's up to 2.8 million now, I think. So there's a lot of people who've stayed, obviously. But if the war develops and if it rolls west, then there will be another surge of people needing to leave to remain safe. So at the moment, the situation has very much calmed down in Lviv. There isn't the same chaotic stations at the station that there was sort of 10 days ago, but that sadly could come back again.
Yeah. Okay, Robin, it's been fascinating speaking to you. What have you got planned for today? What's your plans today?
Well, at the moment we're just seeing how things will develop. The situation around Kyiv and the situation on the peace talks seem to be the main sort of developing stories of the day. So certainly the peace talks are going to be the one everyone's looking at in the hope, I suppose, that we'll hear more optimistic sounds through the day.
Well, Robin, I will keep in touch with you. We just wanted to give people on our channel a little bit of information, and good to hear from you. Stay safe, and I'll keep in touch with you and maybe get you on next week for another update. But I'll keep an eye on your articles, mate. And you just keep your head down and stay safe.
Thanks very much. Thanks for having me on, Steve. All the best.
Take care, mate. Bye bye.
Cheers.